Hello everybody, this is Hammer Striker here. We know a lot of new shooters have gotten into shooting and are buying new guns for the first time, so we've had several requests to do a cleaning video. I happen to have picked this Hellcat, and all we're going to do today is a field strip base cleaning. Not a full tear it completely down cleaning, but just your basic, I've taken it to the range, I need to bring it home and clean it level. We did a full tear down cleaning on a Glock 42, that's another video, but this one's going to be a little bit simpler. So I have a Hellcat, and I have an assortment of things on the table, not all of which you would need, but I'm going to show you everything I've got. I've got solvent, and I happen to like this Outers nitro solvent and nitro oil. And I've got oil, and I actually use two different types of oil. This oil is pretty conventional machine oil type, and it works well. But I also use this Precision Oiler Super Lube, which is a Teflon base. And I use this on all the major moving parts, the rails and stuff like that. And I tend to use this other oil for protecting the finish, protecting the barrel, and things like that. A few of the other things that I've got is I've got two cleaning rods. These are polymer ones. They come with Glocks. If you buy a Glock, you're going to get one of these. And I usually have two of them out. You'll see why as I get going. And I have a cleaning brush. One of the things I'm going to show you about the cleaning brush, I happen to use these Pro Shop brushes. And the reason for that is that the core is brass as opposed to steel. This happens to be a 45 caliber brush, but with that core being brass, it's softer than all of the components of the gun. It's softer than the barrel. Some of the cheaper brushes use steel. And I'm going to show you what these brushes look like, because you want to maintain the brushes. This brush here, if you look at it, and it might be hard to show on camera, but what you're going to see is that all of the bristles are kind of bent. See, that brush is wore out. That needs to be thrown out. You might look at this one and say this needs to be thrown out too, but not really. This one is just dirty. And they're going to go from this bright, really pretty looking to this brownish black color instantly. I mean, the first time you use it, it's going to turn this color. This brush is still usable. But when they get down to all bent and flattened and stuff like that, then not only are they ineffective, but they'll actually potentially start to scratch things. So when your brush gets like that, toss it. Keep some extra ones on hand. You're going to need something for cleaning the channel. And I happen to use these right here. And I'll put a link to these. These actually work real well. I've got one that's kind of wore out, where it's kind of rounded. And I use that for spreading the oil. And I've got one that's kind of a newer one that's square, and I use that for the actual cleaning. Eventually this wore out one will get tossed. It'll get wore out to the point that it's not usable anymore. But these things seem to last a very long time. Depending on what you're doing, you may or may not need a brush. This one has the blue bristles, a little bit stiffer bristles, and for most things this works well. The brass and bronze and the other brushes like that tend to flatten out very quickly, and almost a single use they're worthless. This helps me see if I've got the barrel clean, and you've seen this on several of our videos where we actually use it to show the barrel, to show the rifling and things like that. And then I've got a little low power flashlight in case I want to look in there. It's not a real high power thing, but it'll let you look inside if you see if you've got things clean or if you missed a spot. Beyond that, that's the basic tool set. A couple of clarifications. This cleaning brush I mentioned has got the blue bristles, and it's a little bit stiffer. They also come in a white. And these are regular commercially available. If you go on to even, any of the regular sites, Amazon or wherever, and you say, gun cleaning brush, you're going to find these. The softer bristle is less effective at cleaning. The blue bristles tend to be a little bit more rigid. And then you can get metal bristle brushes that look like this. And they end up looking like this almost instantly. This brush has been used once and it's already pretty bad. And it will tend to stain the material. You'll get this brass or bronze on whatever you're doing. These all come usually in a kit, so you'll get a kit with a 3-pack. But I use these when I need to do some heavy-duty cleaning. When I can't get something off, I'll use this. But I'll start with one of the two softer ones, usually the blue one. The blue one's my favorite go-to. The other thing on the brush, I happen to show you a 45 because that's what I pulled new out of the box. This gun's a 9mm, so if you've bought a 9mm, you would buy the brush in 9mm. You don't force a bigger brush down the bore than the gun is designed for. And they come in all different calibers, all the way down from 17 all the way up to 50, depending on what it is that you've got. A couple other things I'll just show you briefly is I have this kit. And the reason I have this set up is that I have multiple different calibers I have to deal with. So I have Q-tips for cleaning striker channels and things like that, different size patches. I tend to use the largest patch that'll fit well in the bore. And these little tiny ones are for 22 and smaller calibers like that. You move up to this one here, these will go from 38 to 45, so these are the ones I'm going to use in the 9mm. And then these are meant for shotguns, 12 gauge and stuff like that. I'll tend to sometimes use one of these for stuff I'm doing with my hand, use these for the bore, and it kind of varies. You don't need that robust of a kit if you're going to buy one gun and maintain one gun. Same thing with this other box, and I'll push these boxes out of the way. I've got multiple different size brushes, I've got different types of cleaning rods, I've got a Glock disassembly tool, and all the different guns that I've got that require tools to disassemble. So I've kind of assembled a kit. When it's time to clean, I just grab these two little things out of a drawer, set them down, and it doesn't matter what I've set on the table, I've got my tools handy. In the beginning, especially if this is your first gun, your cleaning kit may fit in a Ziploc and grow over time if you get into it and start buying more and more. The only other thing that I've got here is a few paper towels. I fold them over. One I tend to use for my hands. I'm going to get my hands dirty doing this, and I'll wipe my hands off periodically. And another one I use for the various used patches, place to set my brush and stuff like that to kind of centralize the mess. And you can use gloves. I tend not to. What I tend to find with gloves is they get in the way, they dull the ability to feel what I'm doing, and they tend to snag on parts of the gun and the bristles and tear. That's entirely up to you. Beyond that, this is kind of a basic kit that'll get you started. So let's go ahead and get started. So I've got this Hellcat that I mentioned, and the first thing you do with any gun, regardless of the disassembly procedures, is lock it back and verify that the chamber is clear. And you'll see if the chamber happens to be dirty. This is a dirty gun we're going to clean. But this is step one. You hear all the time on the news about people being shot by an unloaded gun while cleaning. Well, obviously the gun wasn't unloaded, and they failed to properly clear it and resulted in something. Now on the Hellcat, in the Springfields and a lot of the SIGs, they use this lever style. So I've locked the gun back and flip it up, and that will release it so that when I unlock the slide I can take it off. Hold on to the slide, release it, bring it forward. Now on the Hellcat, you see I can't go all the way. So I still have to pull the trigger. So make sure it's lined up in the normal in battery, pull the trigger, and then you can slide the gun off. This one happens to have an apex trigger in it, but that didn't change the fact I need to pull the trigger, which of course is important that the gun is clear. Other guns, certain designs like the XDM itself, you can, once you lock this up, it disables the fire control mechanism, unlocks the sear, and you can do it without having to pull the trigger. So now I have a frame. By the way, this is a handle-it grip. We've got a video on that. And of course we have a video on this apex trigger. And I've got the slide. You can do this in pretty much any order you want to. The slide is assembled. I usually tend to set the slide aside and work on the frame first. And I'm going to use one of these bigger patches because I'm going to be using it with my hand. And I want to soak the patch with the solvent. The way I tend to do it is I put a finger over the hole, take like a corner of the patch. So I'm going to put some here, 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 and here. So I just put a finger over it to put upside down, and I'll get a wet spot that will kind of expand. You don't need to go through gallons of solvent, and you really want to avoid pouring the solvent because that's going to be enough solvent to clean what I need to clean, but it's not all over the place. You'll see there's no drips or anything else. The other thing that's important to note, this is a pad that's meant for doing fabric. It's a cutting pad for fabric. These work really good for this. They're really durable. They can take a lot of abuse. You can get them at like Joann Fabrics or Amazon, and they're perfect for this. They're easy to cut, but they don't cut easy. And what I mean by that is when you want to size one, if you do a nice straight razor cut on it and then bend it, it'll snap and cut easily. But if you're working on it with tools, they tend not to gouge and cut too bad, and they hold up well to solvents and having things on them. This particular gun, there's no reason I can't flip the lever down. Some of them that modify the status of the fire control group, it's less of a good idea to flip the lever down while you're in the middle of cleaning. But what that does is it gives me easy access. And what I just cleaned is one of the guide rails. And what you're going to clean in here is the rails, the front area up here, the partial feed ramp if the gun has a partial feed ramp, the pivot point on the locking block, the magazine well, and the rear rails and the top of the sear. Notice I'm not going to disassemble the fire control group. There's pins I can push out, and I can pull this out and disassemble it further. For normal cleaning, that's not what you need to do. So it's only going to take me a minute, and I'm just going to go through and clean using my fingers to guide it up under. So I'm wanting to get up under here as well as on the top. So it's not just a casual just wipe across the top of it and you're done. I'm using my fingernail to drive the material up in there so that I clean everything. I'll use my finger generally to drive it down into the magazine well. You can also use one of these. Yeah, that's why I put the second one out. You can use one of these to push it through. And depending on the size of the mag well, you can generally get up in like this. And you want to do a thorough cleaning. Now occasionally you may need to actually clean alongside the trigger bar and some other areas, but it's not necessary every single time. But you do want to get anything that handles ammo, anything that's involved in the slide movement. Now you notice I didn't use a channel tool here. What you'll try to find on these is it wants to slip off the end and it's more hassle than it's worth. And because on most guns these are out in the open, it's just easier to do it with your fingers. So all you see I'm doing here is I've got the thumb on one side and effectively I'm pinching that rail between the two fingers with the patch in the middle and cleaning it off. Now I'm going to just pause the video. I'm going to finish cleaning this up because it's just, basically it's making sure that I've diligently covered all of that. And then we're going to move on to the slide. Okay, so I'm finished with that, and of course I didn't want to bore you with watching me clean every nook and cranny of it. But you'll see there's leftover solvent. I'm not worried about that. It'll evaporate as I work through it. But I cleaned the rails, the fire control group, this area here. It took me about 30 seconds to a minute to do that. I cleaned up front here and the mag well. And notice one thing I didn't do while I was messing with this. I stayed away from the trigger. Try not to play with the trigger while you're doing this. If the trigger's forward, don't pull it. If the trigger's back, don't try to bring it forward. The state of the fire control group when it's disassembled for cleaning, sometimes some guns are sensitive about that. And it can sometimes be difficult if you mess with the trigger and change the state of the fire control group to get it back where it needs to reassemble it. And the other thing I'm going to do, because I put this lever down, I'm going to put it back up. And you can see why I put the lever down so that I can easily get access to this. I'm going to put the lever back up and set this aside. And I'm going to bring forward the slide. Now I've got a dirty patch here. You can see how much was on it. I'm not going to throw that patch away quite yet, because first thing I'm going to do is clean the feed ramp and the back part of the barrel, and I'm going to shove this patch through the barrel and get the first or the worst of that mess out. And you see how the feed ramp is black with a kind of a scar on it? The feed ramp on this gun is actually shiny silver. That little scar thing is actually some of the feed ramp showing through, probably from where I bumped it with a finger and accidentally cleaned it a little bit. But I'm going to clean that, and you'll see it's nice and shiny. And I'm going to look at it closely, and if I see a little bit of residue of, let's say, a little bit of powder residue that doesn't want to come off, and I scrub it a little bit and it still doesn't come off, then the brush comes out and you can scrub it to come clean. These Hellcats, the XDMs, the Springfields tend to come clean quickly because they're highly polished, so they tend to come right off. And yeah, I usually use the brush dry. Sometimes people tell you to soak the brush in solvent. I tend not to for two reasons. One, now you've got a brush full of solvent, the only way to do that is to pour it. And number two, you guys have all worked with cleaning something with a brush, and if the brush is wet, when you move this, stuff flies everywhere. So if you do wet the brush, you're probably going to end up cleaning up an unholy mess after what you've done. So I'm going to clean this entire area, and then I'm going to take the one that I've got without the brush on it, and I'm going to drive this patch through the barrel. And the way I did that, you saw me just do it, but see, now I've got a much dirtier rag. But all I did is I put the patch over the barrel, took my cleaning stick, put it in the middle of it, and then just shoved it through. Now sometimes it'll bunch up like that, and you notice it halted. And you can see it got just a certain distance. And the reason for that is it bunched up, the chamber is bigger than the barrel, and it stopped. All you have to do is just bring it, pull it back out, and I'll reposition it. And I generally go from the chamber out through the muzzle. And the reason for that is if you go the other way, when it opens up, you can actually leave residue behind. Now, sometimes if you've got a patch that's just big enough that's bunching up on you, instead of putting it in the center like I did, you can put it in a corner. So something like that. And then drive it through. And you'll have to do it a few more times because you'll see really I cleaned, like, say, the bottom 2/3 of the barrel with that. And then pull it back through. Now you can do this. You'll see there's a slot through here. You can do this and go back and forth, but you'll see it has a tendency to want to jam. Whoops, dropped it. And all you're then doing is moving things back and forth. And so I tend to go through and out in one direction continuously. So I'm bringing the dirty stuff out. I tend to avoid things like bore snakes and stuff like that. You know, you'll see them advertised as being, you know, you put the bore snake through one time and it's perfectly clean. Well, now what you've got is this long piece of cloth basically that's getting dirtier and dirtier. They're hard to clean. They tend to have bristles only at one end of them. And in my mind, they're ineffective. You could use a bore snake when you need to clean it quick to get back in the game, but really clean it properly is the best thing to do. So for things like, you know, a hunting weekend or a competition day, and you just want to just clean it quick, yeah, bore snake's not bad, but it's not a proper way to do that. So I'm going to look at this barrel, and it's pretty shiny, it's pretty clean. You're done, right? Well, not really. What you did is you got rid of most of the powder residue. You didn't get rid of any copper or lead that was on there, or any kind of dried or hardened powder residue. So now comes the brush. Now the brush, I do go back and forth because all I'm trying to do here is loosen things up. So I'll take the brush, put it in there, drive it forward, bring it out. It is important to try to bring the brush totally way out so the bristles can kind of reset. If you try to go back and forth inside the barrel, then you're going to have the brush bind up. And it's also a good idea, and I'm trying to do this in a confined space so that I can show you on camera, but try to have it out away from everything so that residue doesn't flip on everything else that's around here. But I'll go back and forth a few times. I'll bring it all the way out, all the way out, all the way out. And by all the way out, the chamber is a little bit bigger, so I don't have to completely come out here, but generally to about there. And I'll just do this a few times. Now, my barrel doesn't look as pretty. It's kind of dull. Now, part of it you can say, well, that's a dirty brush. Yes, and that's true. But even a brand new clean brush would do this, because what I've done now is loosened up anything that was stuck there. And for this, I'm actually going to take a clean patch. Normally, I'll run the same patch through one time. I'll run the existing patch through one time. But I'm going to take a perfectly clean patch for this, because I want to make a point. That's what I loosened up. So that's what was left in the barrel after I cleaned it with the first patch that was left over. Now generally what I'll do is I'll run that dirtiest patch through it one more time, and then I'll run a clean one through and pick up anything else. And now my barrel's nice and clean. And if I see any residue, I'll deal with it, and then, you know, clean the rest of the barrel block, clean the lug, so that now the barrel's all nice and clean, and you can set that aside. Now this patch is dirty, but it's not hopeless at this point. So now I can actually use this patch to clean the slide guides. I'm going to say that one 3 times fast. Right in here. See if I can get some light in there. Of course, everything's black. There you go. This, and there's one of these on each side, mates with these protrusions, and that's how the whole thing stays together. So I'm going to clean those. And this is where this tool comes into play. You pick the end that is the right thickness. It's got a thin end and a thick end. The Hellcat, the Glocks, most of them will use the thin end. I'm going to grab the one that's in better condition. We'll use the thin end, and an XDM will use the thicker end. So it varies what gun you've got. And by the way, these are not specific to Springfield or Glock. They're meant for all guns. They just vary. Take the patch. I usually just take the patch and lay it in there like that. Drive the pick in. Take my finger and pin the patch to the tool and just run it back and forth. And you'll see I got a big black streak. So I'm going to move to another spot and do the same thing. If you don't have a channel tool, you can use a fingernail like this. But what you're going to find is you tend not to get all the way to the bottom of it, and also you're going to eventually your finger's going to hurt. You're going to tear your finger up a little bit doing that, especially certain guns. The shape of it, you may knock parts of your hand against this. So you can do this without a channel tool. You can buy a pick. There's all sorts of things you can use, but make sure whatever you use is polymer, not metal. Don't use a screwdriver. Don't use any kind of mechanics tools. You really don't want to scratch this up. If you get this all scratched up, eventually you can damage the gun, but it also will start to collect stuff. And I just did another pass while I was talking, and you'll notice I got really no noticeable material. So okay, that channel's clean now. I'll just flip it around to the other side. And I'm going to do that off camera. Again, I won't bore you with the whole thing, but before I do that, you also want to clean these channels in here. And you can use the thicker side of it. You want to clean there. You want to clean there. You want to clean the stripper ramp. You want to clean the breech face. Now sometimes the breech face needs a little attention from the brush. And by the way, you're not trying to polish it like a mirror. You just want to get the residue and cleanness off it. And you also want to make sure that you go up under the extractor. And I usually just take the material like this, bunch it up, and hook it under the extractor hook. And you'll see there's the extractor hook right there. And then just go back and forth a couple times to get any residue that may be up under the extractor. If the extractor gets residue under it and it gets dirty, you can see the gap there, you may start to have a failed load, fail to go into battery, the round won't want to slide up there, so it'll drag. So if that gets full of residue, that can actually make the gun malfunction. And clean up through this area here. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to clean all the internals. I'm going to get this all nice and shiny, and then I'll resume. So this is the amount of dirt and filth that I've taken out of this thing so far. I'm going to set these aside, and then the last one I'm going to do is I'm going to take one more. I'm going to use the smaller one at this point because I'm nearly done. Get a little bit of solvent on it, and clean the face, clean the sides. So that you've got rid of all the residue and dirt and everything else. Now at this point you've got a lot of solvent on here. This will evaporate over time. You can either use another patch, or I'll tend to use the hand cleaning paper towel and just kind of wipe the excess off. And then wipe my hands, get the excess solvent off, because at this point now I'm going to switch to oil. You can clean the recoil spring, but it's not necessary to clean it every single time. And when you do clean it, there's a couple different ways to do it. I tend to either use the cleaning tool or my thumb and put it into the screw, treat it like a screw, and just screw and unscrew. And you may have to change sides as you go the different directions, but run it through like it was a screw and you'll clean it. You can do that for both ends. You can push on it and things like that to try to get to the internals of it, but you're going to find that more trouble than it's worth. You're probably going to get pinched, and if you get pieces of the material that you're using to clean down inside there, you're going to cause a bigger problem than the one you're trying to solve. At this point, we're going to clean up the hands. I now have a clean, ready to oil Hellcat. The barrel's over here. So here's all my parts ready to go, ready to oil. So let's go ahead and get about the oiling. You can do this in pretty much any order you want. I tend to use the precision oiler first. And it all depends on the gun. You can look at the various manufacturer recommendations, but the pattern I tend to use that seems to work pretty consistently is to put 3 drops of oil, one at each position along the length of it. So one at one end, one at the other end, and one somewhere in the middle on both sides of the slide. And then I'll take that channel tool. So let me go ahead and do this side. So I'm going to put 1 drop there, 1 drop there. I know you probably can't see, but you have to turn it so it's flat to the ground. But you'll see there's 3 shiny spots. Then I'll take the channel tool and just kind of run it back and forth to spread the oil around a little bit. And it doesn't have to be perfect, because when you put the gun together and it runs back and forth, it's going to slide around. It's going to spread it as well. But 3 drops of oil there is generally enough. Try to avoid oiling the drop safety plunger, which is here, and it varies where that is. And you do that, by the way, the 3 drops on each side. I turned it around, did the other side. If you get oil on the stripper ramp, get rid of it with your finger or a patch. Don't oil the drop safety piston or the sear. Getting oil in the fire control group or the drop safety can cause it to malfunction. Set that aside for the moment. In this case, I'm going to flip this back down. I'm going to oil and spread it with my finger, each of the guides. And I'm going to do that on this side. And I'm doing a drop. And then generally what I'll do is I'll take that oily finger, I've got oil on my finger, and I'll just rub a little bit of oil on the surface of the drop safety, and I'll drop on the locking block where the pivot point is, and then I'll take a dry finger and go up that partial feed ramp so the feed ramp doesn't have oil on it. Now the reason I'm using this precision oiler rather than this was 2 reasons. I mentioned early on this precision oiler has Teflon in it, and also it's easier to get a drop with a tool like this than it does with a bigger tool, and all oil dries out eventually. Guarantee it. I don't care how fancy the oil is, even this will dry out. With the Teflon, it leaves a lubricating layer, so you're less likely to bind or spall or get metal damage if it happens to get dry and you run it. It's not a good idea to run it dry, but life happens. The other thing I'll use the precision oiler on is I'll put a drop of oil in the locking lug, or the pivot lug there, and I'll just spread it around with the tip of the thing. And that's going, because this pivots, the barrel tilts, so it pivots. And I can see that I've got a little bit of solvent on the feed ramp. You want to get rid of that. Now, I'm done with the precision oiling on this. The only other oiling I'm going to do is 2 different things. One, I'm going to oil the barrel. Not the inside, but the outside. You don't want to oil the inside of the barrel. You want the barrel to be fairly dry on the inside, but the outside you'll see it's scuffed up. And the reason it's scuffed up is it slides through that hole, and it brushes and it rubs. So a little bit of oil on the barrel will lubricate that and also minimize the likelihood of corrosion, and I will get it on the barrel hood as well. Now the reason I'm not oiling the inside of the barrel is you don't want to have anything that is going to interfere with the bullet going through the barrel that could potentially cause hydrostatic lock, or that could create a compression in there that increases the pressure. That could be a danger. Now you don't have to worry about it catching fire. If there's oil in there or solvent left by and it catches fire, it'll just burn out. It'll be part of the fireball that comes out of the barrel. But what you are wanting to prevent is anything that would cause excessive pressures. The larger the caliber, the less important that is. In the smaller calibers like 22, it can be more important, especially in the bottleneck cartridges like a 223 or a 5.7. That can be a big deal. But I've slightly oiled the barrel. The barrel internals, if you keep it clean, and the residue that you're going to get from the solvent like this one that leaves a little bit of a oil behind it, will protect the barrel from rusting. And then of course most of these barrels they're either chrome lined or otherwise protected. A lot of these are stainless steel. You can, if you really think that you've got a barrel that's going to be stored in adverse conditions, you can put a little oil on a patch, run the patch through, and then run a dry patch through so that there's an oil film, but not any kind of liquid oil or drips. I'm going to go ahead and put it back together. Recoil springs over here. Try to make sure that you get this centered. It's easy to do that. Now I'm exaggerating, of course. So, or that, you'll see it's not all the way seated down. Most of them, they'll kind of click in place. You can kind of wiggle it back and forth. Depending on the gun, some guns are more prone to being difficult with that. Certain guns, if it's off even just a fraction, they'll try to hang up while you're putting it together. These Hellcats are pretty reliant, or pretty easily centered. Now watch, I'll go to put it together and it'll give me a hard time. But center the recoil spring, make sure it's seated fully. The barrel's seated and everything's put together properly. I'm going to put the caps on my chemicals so that I don't end up knocking one of them over and making a mess that I have to clean up. I've lubricated both rails on both sides. You'll see they're shiny. And I'm going to put it back together. Now I need to flip the takedown lever back up if I did pull it down. Line it up so that the rear is lined up with the guides. And lock it back. When I go to pull it back, if it's any more difficult to lock it back than it normally is, then stop. You probably got that recoil spring off center. And depending on the gun, like a Glock, when you pull it all the way back, it relocks the takedown mechanism, so you don't have to take any further steps. With Springfields or the SIGs and many of those, you have to flick the takedown lever back into position and then put it back into battery. Then the last thing to do is to put just a little bit of oil on the slide. And it varies what the slide is made of, how important it is that you oil it. And generally what I'll do is I'll go back to, which I had just closed up, I'll go back to my oil and I'll just put a couple drops on the side and then take a clean patch and basically just kind of polish it up. You don't want the slide to be noticeably dripping with oil, because then when you go to holster it, to put it up against your body, against your clothing, you're going to make a mess. And you'll see that with that couple drops, I pretty much have been able to smooth and polish the entire thing. If you see any obvious dry spots, just polish them up. Kind of go up and down a little bit in the serrations. You definitely don't want this dripping with oil. If for no other reason than when you go to operate it, it's going to be difficult. And don't worry so much about fingerprints unless you're, doing this as for show. It's going to get fingerprints on it, especially because it's the nature of it. You got oil, you got solvents, you're going to get fingerprints. But now I have a properly done Springfield, which what I just did here will apply to pretty much all of the Polymer Wonders. They all take down in some similar manner. The Mossbergs, you lock them back and you pull the base plate off, pull the striker out, push it forward. That's kind of uncommon. Most of them you take it apart intact. Now I did not disassemble the slide any further, just like I did not disassemble the fire control group. There are ways in these various guns to take these back plates off. They generally require a tool like a punch or this Glock disassembly tool. You pull it off and you pull the striker out. That's not necessary for routine field strip, except for the Mossbergs where you have to do it to take it apart. I'll put a link to the full disassembly where I tear a Glock completely down, and you can see how that works. If you do choose to clean the striker channel, which you have to do periodically but nowhere near as often as the normal cleaning, it's important to know that most guns, the striker channel should remain dry. So you don't oil it, you use solvent to clean it, but then you get rid of the solvent. You either use Q-tips or something like that to get rid of the solvent. The striker channel and the drop safety plunger should remain dry. Oil in that will cause buildup and will cause the gun to malfunction. If you get the striker channel gets messed up, you'll get fail to fire due to light strikes. If the drop safety plunger gets dirty, it can either stick in the safe position, meaning the gun won't fire, or worse, it could stick in the fire position and basically disable your drop safety. So don't, I mentioned that when I had it apart, don't get any oil in that part of it. So hopefully this was helpful. I know we get a lot of requests to clean this gun or that gun, and most of them fit into a few categories. We'll do a cleaning video on a 1911. They're a little different design, but overall the majority of them use either the Glock where you pull down two little levers, or this design where you flip a lever of some sort either up or down. It varies depending on the gun, but overall they work basically the same once you get them apart. So if you've got, for example, a 226, you got a P320, you've got a Springfield, you've got a Glock, this basic design or pattern will work for all of them. And then maybe we'll do a cleaning video on something like the P238, some of those where you have to pull a pin out to get to them when they're a little bit different. Beyond that, if you like our videos, please give us a thumbs up, share, subscribe, click that bell up there to get notified if you do. Check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Patreon, kind of all over the place. And thank you.